Hi everyone, welcome to our next edition of Meet the Creator. This is our picture book interview for January 2024, and I've got a real treat for you because we don't only have the author of this particular book with us, we have the illustrator, which is a real treat. So today we're going to be talking about Baboo the Unusual Bee, and I'm going to be talking with Liana Bird and Aisha Tengiz. So welcome. It's very nice to see you here.
Thank you for having us. Hello.
Are you happy to start us off with a reading?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to read, and I think Aisha will be showing some of the beautiful illustrations. So,
Wonderful.
Baboo the Unusual Bee. There was a young bee who lived in a hive who liked to dance ballet and hip hop and jive. The other bees thought him a rather strange fellow because he had pink stripes instead of bright yellow. The bee, named Baboo, used to sit on his own. With no one to play with, he danced all alone. But one day, Baboo felt a bit more courageous and went up to talk to a big bee, Ignatius. He quietly whispered, "Could I play with you? I'd love to be friends. My name's Baboo." Ignatius laughed loudly and answered with spite, "A pink bee that dances? It just isn't right. I'd never be friends with a bee who's so odd." And he flicked up his wing and gave Baboo a prod. Dejected and downcast, Baboo flew away to a garden nearby where he sat in dismay. He slumped by the stump of a juniper tree and cried as he thought of that cruel, thoughtless bee. "I wish I was yellow, like all of the others. Why aren't I the same as my sisters and brothers?" He looked up and saw that he'd been overheard. High up on a leaf sat a green ladybird. "How come you're all green?" Baboo shyly said. "All of the ladybirds I've met are red." The ladybird smiled as she flew to the tree. "Well, this is the first time I've met a pink bee." As they all danced together, Baboo said, "Besides, what matters the most is who we are inside. So if ever you worry you don't look the same as Thingamajig or old What's-her-name, remember that whether you're pink, green, or blue, there's nothing more special than just being you."
It was a wonderful reading. I mean, I have to say myself, from reading the book, the gorgeously bright illustrations and those fantastic rhyming words. If I had to choose one word to describe the book, I think I'd have to say joyful, because it's such a happy book. I absolutely loved it. So where did the idea for the book come about?
So I'm not 100% sure where it initially came from. I always think of different ideas for stories. And ever since I can remember, I've been writing in my phone notes or in scrapbooks, little ideas and kind of writing stories for myself and poems. And I just one day had an idea about a bee with pink stripes. And initially I wanted to write it for an older audience. And I had a kind of more convoluted story about an adventure that this pink bee goes on. But then when I had my second child, Iggy, and she was born during lockdown, and I was, like the rest of the world, stuck at home, and I had this newborn baby on me, and I was very much living from feed to feed, and my existence became about feeding this child, and I started to go through what I'm sure a lot of women go through, which is losing a real sense of self. And I think lockdown and the pandemic really exacerbated that as well. And I was sitting there with her nursing one day on me and looking over at the pump, this sort of dreaded pump that I was going to have to go to next. And I just had a real moment of, I've got to do something for me. And I have to prove that I can still think and be a human, an adult who has ideas, and maybe now I can just write this book. So while she was sort of on me feeding, I just took up my phone with the other hand and started typing up this idea that had come into my head. And I always kind of loved the idea of celebrating our differences, and how as we get older, when you're young, you really want to fit in with the crowd and you really want to be like your friends and you don't want to be too different. But as we get older, we start to really realize that, your uniqueness is so special and so incredible. And some of us, discover things that can make us stick out from the crowd in a really good way, or that can help us to show our individuality. And it's all about finding ourselves. So I kind of wanted to reflect that in a book, for my kids and for all kids. And then, of course, Aisha came along and brought it all to life so beautifully.
So how, bringing Aisha in, how closely did you work together on it? It's kind of a chicken and egg. What came first? Did you have the words at the same time as the pictures, or how did that work?
Yeah, no, the words were first. So we didn't really have any communication until our publisher introduced us to each other post reading the piece. So I was kind of in contact with the publisher anyway, because we were thinking of working together. And she sent over Liana's story and was kind of like, is this something you might be interested in working on? And I was just initially like absolutely. I think I decided before I even finished reading it that it was definitely something I wanted to illustrate. Like you said, how vibrant and kind of colourful the text is already before the illustrations. I could just kind of see really clearly what I wanted to do with it. And we kind of began our communications after that. But to be honest, in kind of answer to your question, we didn't really, I kind of got to know Birdie a lot more after the book, I think. And we'd had like a few conversations, and obviously getting the characters right for her as well was really important. So everything would always be okayed through her too. But yeah, I think I expected when kind of before working within publishing that the communication with a writer would be a lot more closer, but it's surprisingly not.
Well, I can assure you, it seems as though it was very, very close when you look at the book, because it's all such a cohesive package, if you like. The pictures perfectly complement the text, without a doubt. They perfectly complement the text.
And I will say as well, Aisha was really amazing, because the text was finished when she came into it, or at least, almost there. And but she was so collaborative, and I think a lot of illustrators, might be more resistant to that. And actually, what was really amazing about Aisha is she was so open to us having discussions, particularly around the characters themselves and the essence of the character, and how to show that in the face. So obviously Aisha is, I consider, a real color master. So of course I would never touch that. But if I came back to her and said, oh, I think he needs to look sweeter, or he needs to look mean, or actually, like we really talked about the character essence. And actually the character of Baboo was kind of based on a friend of mine, interestingly enough. So I have a very close friend of mine, and he grew up in Yorkshire, and he was very much, the only gay in the village, shall we say. And he loved Spice Girls and ballet and wearing tutus and, dancing. And he was very badly bullied for it. But actually, when he became 16, he got a place in London in this amazing dance school. He ended up traveling the world. He's a very successful drag artist now. And so, and that's his different is his greatest strength and his greatest superpower. So in a way, I was also trying to kind of not guide Baboo to look a little bit like him, because in my head, I could see my friend, right? But I think, Aisha never said to me, like, can you back off a bit? She was so open, specifically around characterization. It was such a lovely process, and she brought obviously so much to the table, but those little final tweaks, it was a really, really lovely process, and so joyful to work with her.
Excellent. Well, I know that the book is about embracing your own individuality, and that comes across very strongly. But also, there's also a theme about a bit about bullying in there. So there's things you could do around that. But also, I loved the bits in the bee facts at the back of the book. I thought they were wonderful. Absolutely loved them. So did you find out anything that surprised you when you were doing research for those bee facts?
Yeah, I'm such a nerd when it comes to facts. I actually, before this was my first children's book, but before I'd written a book called The Mice Who Sing for Sex and Other Weird Tales from the World of Science. And it was a very, fun facts around the world of science book. So I really geek out on that kind of stuff. I can go deep into the vortex of finding out facts. So although we only showed, some of our most fun and kid-friendly facts, I really enjoyed digging into the world of bees. They're such magical, incredible creatures. They're like little aliens, really. And also, to make it so acutely aware of how much we rely on them as people, how much of our food is 1 in 3 things on our plate that we take for granted wouldn't exist without bees, and how important they are to us. But also these amazing little quirks, like the fact that bees actually do these little waggle dances to communicate to each other, the fact they leave little smelly footprints on flowers to talk to each other. They're so clever, they're so quirky, they're so magical, and also they're so vital to not just the world and the ecosystem, but to us humans too. And so it was a lot of fun researching bee facts, for sure.
I must admit that was the one that most surprised me, the leaving the smelly footprints. Who knew? Now this time is flying by, and it always does, but I wanted to ask you, Aisha, a little bit about the how you did the illustrations. Do you do them digitally or how?
Yeah, so I work with combinations. So I normally sketch everything out on paper. I've probably got, I reckon if I dig around for like 10 seconds, not even that, a second, I could probably find a few. Oh yeah, here's one. So I kind of, see, it's just chaos. There's one kind of, so these are like really early sketches, which I actually quite rarely like go from too far. The first thing I draw is quite often the kind of final piece, but I kind of much prefer sketching it out on paper to begin with loosely, and then I'll go into working into it digitally. So these are some of the characters when I was kind of coming up with them. When I sketched out most of the book, I was actually interrailing, so I was traveling across Europe with like my sketchbook on the train, coming up with all the spreads to meet the kind of deadline. So I just ended up doing a lot of that in that time, which was actually really nice because it kind of got me out of the studio, which is a fantastic space, but it kind of allowed me to get more in with nature. And living in London, it's not something I kind of approach much. When I was working on the initial drafts for this, I kept going to the park to try and find bugs and stuff, but like it was a lot easier when I was kind of out and about. There's another one for the front cover. So you can see sometimes I just kind of get bored halfway through and I'm like, yeah, I know what I'm doing now, and then I like just start doing it on the computer. But yeah, it's kind of a combination. So it always starts off there, and then
they are absolutely gorgeous illustrations. I was blown away by the book, and in fact I can't wait to read it to my 3-year-old granddaughter, because although I say that, but I get the feeling I'm soon going to know it off by heart, and then I'll get a little bit bored with it because especially children of that age. I mean, she's 3, and Mini Beasts, come on, she is obsessed with Mini Beasts, so I know she's going to absolutely love this. I do feel that there's going to be a bit of dancing in my future as well, because she will want to join in with the dancing, which as a nanny I have to do it.
I think we have to bring out a musical version of this book soon, where press a button and you have a little jive. And actually, that reminds me, I would love to, it's very, very early days, but I would love to see this book brought to the stage for children, and have a lot of music and dance and colour as part of it. And I know we've already trying to hook Aisha in, if we did do it, to be obviously involved in set design. So we'd love to bring this to life and watch this space on that one.
That would be incredibly cool. Incredibly cool. And now you've said it, you've got to make it happen. You do know that, don't you?
Well, I did. I mean, that's why I thought if I say it now, then that's the kick up the bum. We need to actually make it. Now we've got to be true to our words. So
well, thank you so much for coming along today, both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm very happy to say that today, for our middle grade book for January, I'm going to be interviewing Joanna Brown, and I'm going to be talking to her about the amazing book that I have here in front of me, which is called Bright Stars of Black British History. So lovely to see you, Joanna. Thank you for coming along.
Hi there, Bev. Hello, lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm absolutely fine. I'm absolutely over the moon with the book. Loved it. Learned so much from it, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. Would you mind perhaps giving us a little reading to give us a flavour of the book, please?
I'd be delighted. Thank you. So yes, I'm Joanna. I write for children as J.T. Williams, and I'm reading from the beginning of Bright Stars of Black British History. Did you know that the famous nurse Mary Seacole developed her super nursing skills in Jamaica when she was a girl, practicing on dolls and pets before braving the front lines of the Crimea to heal the sick? Have you heard about how the actor Ira Aldridge narrowly escaped capture by slave traders as a boy before gracing stages all over Europe as one of the greatest ever Shakespearean performers? Have you ever wondered why Claudia Jones, a political journalist, founded Notting Hill Carnival, Britain's legendary celebration of Caribbean culture? Bright Stars of Black British History is a collection of illustrated biographies shining a light on the lives of Black British people in history. It's a celebration of their contributions to a shared past. The Black presence in Britain is long-standing, and people of African descent have lived in Britain for many centuries. They've influenced the course of history in powerful and exciting ways. The stories told here are tightly interwoven with familiar threads in the narrative of British history. The court of King Henry VIII, transatlantic slavery and its abolition, Queen Victoria's reign, the First and Second World Wars, the Jazz Age, and the Windrush story. So join us on a journey of celebration and struggle, resilience and resistance, migration and movement, challenge and change. Join us in joy as we honour these bright stars of Black British history.
I have to say, Joanna, wow, what a brilliant introduction.
Oh, thank you.
It's fabulous. It really does give you such an amazing flavour of what the book is all about. So whose idea was the book originally, and what was the thinking behind it?
So that is a really good question. And in a way, it's sort of hard for me to answer because it was such a sort of collaborative process, really. And I really like thinking about, what is the beginning of this story? Where did it begin? I used to be a primary school teacher myself. And, I was born in Britain. I grew up in Britain, and I have mixed Sierra Leonean and English heritage. So on a very personal level, I've always had this kind of curiosity about my place in this country and my own sort of personal history. And actually, I've learned so much through my own family history about this sort of long-standing Black presence in Britain. And Angela Vives, who's the illustrator of the book, she's a good friend of mine. We've known each other for many, many years, in fact. So, the sort of cooking up the idea came from conversations between us. She was actually doing a master's in children's illustration and was focusing on the idea of picture book biographies as sort of, engaging and exciting learning resources for children. And I've been running some workshops at the British Library, actually, about Ignatius Sancho, and then later about sort of the Windrush generation and Una Marson in particular. And Angela came up with the idea of making a book initially about Sancho. And we approached Thames and Hudson with this idea. And we had a few conversations. We went backwards and forwards. And then they asked if we'd be interested in doing something broader, like if I'd like to sort of write about more personalities in a collection. And I just sort of leapt at it because I was like, look, there are so many people, like, hold me back, So I went away and I developed a proposal. I wrote up a list of all of these different figures from different walks of life, and presented that to the publishers. And ultimately, after that, we were away. We were developing the book a year later. And this was all quite a while ago, but yeah, like 4 years on, those conversations started in 2019. So like 4 years on, here we are with a beautiful book in our hands.
you have indeed got a beautiful book, beautiful book. So I'm guessing it probably gave, you needed lots of research because there are, so many different people in it. So how long did it actually take you to write? And during that research, did you encounter, new things that were new to you, people that were new to you?
Definitely, in terms of the kind of content of people's stories. So all of the personalities that I've written about in the books, we sort of start with John Blank, the African Tudor trumpeter who played at the court of King Henry VIII, and we work our way through time, and we end with Claudia Jones, who effectively was the originator of bringing Carnival to London, and all of the figures I already knew about, I'd read about to some degree, some more than others. But I felt that I'd been working at conferences around Black British history. I'd been going to lots of talks, and the sort of recurrent theme that I kept hearing, that kept coming up, was we need more educational resources. We need more books to help tell these stories for younger people. And this was kind of going around and round in my mind. And as a primary school teacher, I'd really felt this strongly as well. So while I was doing that kind of workshop work, I suppose I was kind of clocking for myself who I might be telling stories about in the future. And then when it came to the research process, once we'd sort of pinned down who was going to feature in the book, and I really started going much more deeply into the research. So for me, that was archival research. So sometimes I'm looking at sort of original documents, lots of sort of digitized letters as well, and diaries, reading biographies of these people, going to museums, going to galleries, really in-depth writing process and research process. And for each figure, it's almost like you have to immerse yourself. So I obviously wrote it one chapter at a time.
Yeah.
And so I could really sit with each person and really sort of almost trying, you're trying to get to know somebody when you're writing their life story. It feels like such a responsibility when you're representing somebody's life. But I really love that part of the process, kind of really sitting with them and trying to think about why they made the decisions that they did, why they made the choices that they did. And I think for me, the new discoveries, or the interesting discoveries, were realizing that things that happened in people's childhoods that had helped shape their future journey. So I mentioned in the introduction, this idea that Mary Seacole, who went on to become this incredible doctoress and made such a significant contribution to medicine in the Caribbean, in Britain, that she was practicing on dolls and pets as a child. Una Marson, who went on to found a feminist magazine in her early 20s, was writing poetry as a child, as a girl. And I kind of felt that a really important part of the process for me was to really dig into people's childhoods and use that as a way to reveal for young readers the ways in which, even when we're very young, we're already on a journey that could take us in so many inspiring directions later in life.
Well, I certainly found myself from reading it, factual books are not my favourite. I will totally admit factual books are not my favourite. But because you're talking about people's lives, I loved your writing style, because it reads as stories, which is, what we want it to be, because that's where the interest comes in, doesn't it? And I really did enjoy that aspect of your writing, because it is very much people's stories. And it comes.
Thank you so much. And that's so important to me, because I do feel, as you say, that's where we connect, isn't it? That the empathy comes from making connections with people on a human level. And in order to achieve that, I think you have to sort of find the sense of character. And I'm really grateful to hear you say it, because literally, if you were to say to me, what's the one single most important thing you sort of want to try and achieve through the writing, it is about creating a sense of story and helping people to understand there are different ways in which we can shape the information, but how do you make it really engaging and intriguing for not just younger readers, but for all readers?
Oh, definitely, because I mean, although this is billed, if you like, as a middle grade book, I really do feel it could go up into secondary, even adults, because the writing isn't written to a child, if you know what I mean, we can all appreciate these stories.
Yeah.
And I think it would be just as useful in a secondary as it would in a primary, personally.
Definitely. And I've never wanted to sort of talk down to children as a teacher as well. I've got quite high expectations, and I always kind of feel like, let's bring the language up. Let's kind of just speak to you sort of with respect. And if there are words in the book, because I use quite tricky language as well, if there are words in the book you don't understand, it's so easy to look things up now. And obviously the illustrations as well offer another way into the text. But the person I had sort of reading over my shoulder, if you like, was an imaginary sort of West African grandmother. So I wanted to make sure that, the elders would also feel that I was honouring these people's stories in the right way.
No pressure there then.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah, it's a high bar.
Yeah, just a bit. So I think for myself, if I had to choose the story that I most related with, I suppose, it would probably be Lena Marson, because I grew up in New Cross, not far from Peckham. But I was really surprised and disappointed at myself that I didn't know anything about this person, didn't know anything at all about her. And I didn't know anything about the League of Coloured Peoples and the things that they were doing to work against racism. So I'm going to ask you a really difficult question now. If you had to choose, which of the subjects did you find most interesting and inspirational in the book?
It is a really difficult question. It's like being asked to choose a favourite child in a way. So I'm going to sort of go a roundabout way. So on the one hand, I absolutely agree with you that, I really sort of think there's this sense of why don't we know more about these people? Yeah. And as you said, it's so exciting that the library in Peckham has been renamed after Una Marson, because she was extraordinary. She was broadcasting on the BBC. I've got an amazing photograph, it's not in front of that book actually, where she's surrounded by like sort of T.S. Eliot and other sort of writers at the BBC, and really sort of holding court. And I think really it's more of a reflection on whose stories have been honoured and centred, if you like, in the mainstream, that we don't know more about these figures. And Harold Moody, for example, who, his story is connected to that of Una Marson's, because they both worked for the League of Coloured Peoples. Harold Moody effectively set it up. But he was also advocating for broader histories to be taught in schools for children. He was advocating for a Black curriculum in schools decades ago. So I think it's really interesting when we also see that sometimes, work that we may think of as being maybe sort of new or pioneering, that work has been done time and time again. One of the new discoveries I sort of made, if you like, research-wise, was realizing how many repetitions there were from one story to the next, and how many experiences were common to so many of the different figures in the book. And when I started writing the book, Ignatius Sancho, who I went on to write about in the Lizzie and Bell mysteries, he was really sort of, my first sort of figure of focus at that point when I started writing. But I've got lots of different points of connection. So Evelyn Dove, who's the singer I write about, who worked with the first ever orchestra to bring jazz to the UK, the Southern Syncopated Orchestra. I discovered later in life, having known a little bit about her work as a musician, I discovered during lockdown that she was actually my great aunt. So I have a family connection. So her father was my great grandfather. So she is someone that I'm also writing about now for adults. So I'm developing some fiction for adults as well. And I'm working on a novel that's loosely based on Evelyn Dove and her world, because there was a whole kind of scene of Black musicians and writers and artists living in London in the 1920s. And that's a scene I'm really, really kind of intrigued by. So it's not really to pick a favourite, but the figure with whom I'm sort of going to be moving forward, as it were, is Evelyn Dove.
Excellent. Well, it was an unfair question. It really was an unfair question, but there we go. So actually that's answered one of my other questions, which is what are you working on next, which is fantastic. But I cannot finish this interview without talking about Angela Wives illustrations, because they are just a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
And you know, as you've already said, you're already friends, but when did you get to see the illustrations as they were being done, or as at the end? And of course, what do you think of them?
I'm so sorry. So you may have noticed my internet dropped out a little bit there then.
Oh, goodness.
So could you just repeat the question for me? I heard you say, when did I first get to see the illustrations? Was that the end of the question?
Yeah, that was
right.
That was kind of the beginning of the question. So when did you get to see the illustrations as they were happening, or did you only see them when the book was finished? And
no, so yeah, it was a very sort of backwards and forwards process. So as I said, when we were first thinking about Ignatius Sancho together, Angela had developed some work then, so I'd had the opportunity to see these beautiful illustrations and this really gorgeous, very sensitive, painterly style that she has. And I felt really strongly that I hadn't really seen that style of artwork applied to sort of Black history subjects before. And there was something about her work that felt, there's quite a dreamlike quality about it. There's a very soft quality about it that I felt really drawn to. And some of the early sketches that Angela did in charcoal, really beautiful black and white sketches. I mean, you know, she'd show them to me and I would just immediately feel choked up, like tears would spring to my eyes, because when I'm doing the research, especially for people who lived in an age pre-photography, you know, there's a huge challenge there for Angela in terms of her own research, because generally often if you're researching for a book, the publishers will say, well, we'll send you some visual references, or they'll ask the writer, can you send some visual references? And not only did those visual references not exist, but actually when you're looking at depictions of Black people sort of pre-19th century in illustrations and paintings, they're either sort of grotesque caricatures, or we're always kind of down in the corner of the painting. You know, I wrote about this in Portraits and Poison, the way we're sort of always positioned sort of on our knees or very sort of deferential. So there weren't really models, or many models of people sort of holding, you know, the center of the frame, or kind of looking proud, dignified, you know, sort of a range of nuanced ways of representing Black people on the page. So we really had to do a lot of imagining. And obviously as a writer, I'm doing that all of the time. But then to have the opportunity to see on the page these wonderful scenes, and it felt really important to me to see scenes where you haven't just got the person on their own, but, you know, Una Marson in a working meeting with a team of people, you know, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, when he's at a Pan-African conference, just going to find him, this wonderful musician, you know, with a choir. Beautiful images that I know from my historical research that all of these events have taken place in Britain, but it's not something that I've ever seen in period dramas or on television or in films or in that visual culture. So having that visual record, again, especially for our younger readers, to really help them imagine and really make it plain to all of us that this is a history that has in many ways been hidden from sight, that felt extremely important. And Angela, you know, we both did, but Angela worked super, super hard. Many, many hours of work have gone into making sure that we can again sort of honour that visual record.
And that definitely shows. I mean, the illustrations are just beautiful. I'm actually sitting here stroking the front cover of the book. Because it's just so pretty and so tactile. So yeah, we're both doing the same thing, both sitting here. Well, it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. Thank you so much, Joanna. I can't recommend the book enough to those of you that are listening or watching. It is absolutely amazing, and I think it should be in every school in the country, because it's just perfect. So I'll look forward to reading your adult one that you're working on next.
Brilliant.
But thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, Bev. What a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
You're welcome.